The Big Bang creation is more a myth than a theory. It may be termed a science dream on the order of fairy tales. The dream begins with nothing. Before the Big Bang happened, there was nothing. The universe did not exist. Reality was an inconceivable dark void. Suddenly, in this infinite nothing, 13.8 billion years ago, the entire universe exploded into being. All matter, all energy, all that there is and ever will be, is deemed to have emerged in the space of the first 3 minutes out of the whirlpool of the giant explosion that expanded into all direction from its central point as a primordial cloud of dust that is still expanding outward with ever-increasing speed. The dust is deemed to have condensed into galaxies and stars and planets. From within the dust, the hydrogen atoms are said to have grouped together into giant spheres of gas that became stars. It is deemed that each star, by its accretion of weight, became so hot under the resulting immense gravitational compression that the hydrogen atoms in its core began to fuse into larger helium atoms. The building of larger atoms is deemed to create energy, from which the stars derive their light. Thus each gas star became a sun, powered from within by its own substance. All this comes together as a nice tale that almost makes sense, but the tale is full of holes created by paradoxes. Numerous impossible paradoxes, supported by physical evidence, solidly refute the impossible theory. The existence of the Earth itself is a paradox under the Big Bang theory. It shouldn't be what it is. Its composition disproves the theory that the universe was created in a primordial explosion 13.8 billion years ago. Even the nature of light disproves the explosion theory of the Big Bang, in which the formed dust condensed into galaxies that are deemed to have expanded across the cosmos and are still expanding and racing away from us into all directions with still accelerating motions. As proof for the accelerating motion, a theory has been invented that interprets the spectral redshift in light from distant galaxies as being caused by the source of the light racing away from us, the observer. The redshift of light from distant galaxies is said to prove the Big Bang theory of the accelerating expansion of the universe. Light is said to be stretched out as the most distant galaxies are deemed to be racing away faster and faster the further they are located from us. That's the tale that is being told. It is almost believable. In the real world, the theory breaks down when the measured redshift is more rationally perceived as the result of energy depletion of the photons over long distances in their encountering plasma and atomic gases in interstellar space. The energy depletion causes the entire electromagnetic spectrum to shift towards a lower energy state, which means a shift towards the red. The photons of light are said to be packages of energy. The more energy they contain, the tighter the packages are packed. When the energy is dissipated, the packages become larger. The violet expands into blue, the blue into green, the green into yellow. The entire spectrum shifts towards the red. This simple reality disproves the Big Bang creation theory. We also have a gigantic piece of evidence that disproves the Big Bang theory even more, and proves at the same time that every sun is a plasma-powered electric nuclear fusion engine that synthesizes all atomic elements that are known to exist in the universe. This item of evidence is the Earth itself. The proof for this statement was delivered only recently in a massive scientific effort to determine the age of the Earth. It had been discovered previously that large atomic elements, such as uranium, decay over time in a chain of mutation that ends in lead. Lead is the heaviest stable element that exists. It has been further discovered that the rate of decay is knowable for the different decaying elements. Uranium, for example, is known to have a half-life of 4.5 billion years. This means that over the span of 4.5 billion years, half of the volume of uranium that existed in the beginning has become transmuted into lead. It has been reasoned that the measurable ratio of lead in uranium-containing rocks can be used to accurately determine the age of the Earth. On this basis, the age of the Earth and of the solar system as a whole has become known to be in the range of 4.54 billion years. It has been discovered that the lead-to-uranium ratio is always the same wherever uranium is found on our planet, including in cases where uranium is found in the remains of asteroids. The measured ratio disproves the Big Bang theory. The ratio proves that all the atomic elements on Earth and in the solar system nearby were newly created at the time the Earth and the solar system was formed, which occurred likely near the center of our galaxy, where the plasma pressure is strong and the fusion process on the surface of the Sun is immensely productive, so much so that even the largest atoms were synthesized in substantial quantities, such as uranium. The scientific dating of the Earth that has been timed with the atomic clock of the universe proves that all the atomic elements that the Earth is made of did not originate as materials that were formed in the Big Bang more than 13 billion years ago. The radioactive decay would have then produced a much greater ratio of lead in uranium-containing rocks. The measured ratio proves that all the atoms for the planets in the solar system were synthesized new at the time of the forming of the solar system. This means that the synthesis could only have occurred on the surface of the Sun in the time of its initial intense state. While atomic fusion synthesis still occurs on the surface of the Sun today, it does so with lesser intensity. The dating of the Earth with the atomic clock of the universe doesn't match the Big Bang creation theory by a long way. It thereby disproves it. It leaves the external fusion Sun standing as the only possible contender for the synthesis of the atomic elements in the solar system. So it is that the scenario that solves the paradox is a case of actual historic evidence. The fabled theory that all the stars and planets were drawn together by the gravitational accretion of cosmic dust from the Big Bang explosion doesn't make any sense anyway. The theory is a paradox in itself. No principle exists that would single out the hydrogen atoms from the cosmic dust to gravitationally form a star. Hydrogen atoms have the least gravitational attraction of all the atoms in the universe. Even helium asserts a 4 times greater gravitational attraction than hydrogen. Shouldn't then all the stars be made up of helium? And what about the really heavy elements with huge gravitational attraction, such as iron, lead, even uranium? Shouldn't they form the core of the stars? The entire hydrogen sun theory is a paradox. It doesn't have a basis to stand on that makes any sense. The hydrogen sun theory is so evidently false that it is surprising that it is still maintained in the empty box of the gravity-only universe represented by the Big Bang dream. Just look at the volume of hydrogen that is needed to fill up the sun, and also the 4 gas planets that are almost entirely made up of hydrogen. This enormously huge volume of hydrogen does not exist according to the cosmic abundance ratio that has been measured on the sun and throughout the universe. According to the theory, the sun started as a hydrogen star, which has converted hydrogen into helium for more than 4.5 billion years towards its present ratio. Where did this huge volume of hydrogen come from that the Sun supposedly has converted into helium over those billions of years of its operation at an estimated hydrogen conversion rate of 620 million metric tons per second? The resulting dynamic consideration places the hydrogen ratio that would have had to exist at the birth of the Sun way out of the range of the measured cosmic abundance ratio. This impassable paradox can only be resolved on the basis of recognizing that the Sun is not, and never has been, a sphere of hydrogen and helium gas, but exists as a sphere of plasma. With this fundamental correction made in the theory, the gas ratio in the solar system then closely reflects the measured cosmic abundance ratio. The case of the comparison also illustrates what it is that we actually see when we look at the Sun through the umbra of the sunspots. When we look at the Sun and look through the umbra of the sunspots, we see a Sun that is dark inside. We can see plainly that internal nuclear fusion isn't happening in the Sun. The Sun would be brighter inside if nuclear fusion would be happening internally as the solar power source. We see instead that everything happens on the surface of the Sun. This means that what we see in the Sun is exactly what we should see for a Sun that is a sphere of thinly dispersed plasma with electric fusion occurring on its surface. We see that nothing exists there to be seen below the surface. Plasma particles, which are 100,000 times smaller than an atom is, are invisible. They emit no light. Plasma is dark. It is a type of black hole. That's what we see. Of course, by looking at the Sun, we can also see that the Sun is intensely energetic on its surface. From where then does the Sun derive its energy and its substance for synthesizing fusion? Where would the energy come from if it didn't come from external plasma flowing into the Sun? The answer is simple. The Sun's energy and its fusion input are both exclusively derived from plasma. From plasma our world was formed. But where does the plasma come from? Is it the product of the Big Bang? Evidently it didn't, since it is well demonstrated that the Big Bang theory is a science fairy tale. So where did the plasma come from, and still does come from? The radiometric dating of the Earth with the atomic clock of the universe proves the solar synthesized creation of the Earth to be real, as a construct of fused plasma. We're looking at enormous volumes of plasma flowing into the Sun for this gigantic creative process to be possible. It is interesting to note that the free plasma gets consumed by the fusion process. The consumption creates a plasma sink that gets plasma moving. Plasma has no energy in itself, but becomes energetic when it is set in motion. And for plasma to move, we need a source and a sink that it flows into. The cold fusion process is this sink. It is not enough for the Sun to have plasma to flow into it, to energize it. The flow needs a sink for it to function. The fusing of protons into electrically neutral atoms creates this sink. If plasma would merely flow into the sun to energize it, it would simply pile up there and nothing would happen. Plasma needs to flow to be intensely energetic, just like water needs to flow for hydroelectric generating systems to work. For hydroelectric generating to work, water needs to flow from a high point, the source, to a low point. The energy of the water flowing from a high point, pulled by the force of gravity, delivers the energy that turns the turbine. The energy that is generated on the sun must have a similar potential. It must have a source and a sink for the energetic flow to happen. On the sun, these conditions are met. The nuclear fusion process energizes the dynamics that also create energy in the form of light and heat along the way. The synthesizing fusion on the surface of the sun literally eats up plasma, packs it together, and spits it out as electrically neutral atoms that flow away with the wind. Without this process of the sun eating plasma, nothing would happen, nothing would flow. The process may be termed cold fusion, as the process is not initiated by intense thermal agitation in the range of millions of degrees, but functions by cold electromagnetic plasma acceleration and plasma pressure that also produce a modest amount of thermal energy and light along the way at a temperature of 5,505 degrees Celsius. Electric plasma fusion is the sink that activates the source. The sun and its fusion process is easily identified by its functioning as a consuming sink. In comparison, the source is far more vague and difficult to conceptualize. Nevertheless, this too is of critical importance to us living on this planet. Even in hydroelectric generating systems, the source of the water that delivers the energy is often miles distant and is rarely perceived as related to the sink system. But if the plasma flow into a sink activates the force, no matter how far away the source may be located, just as it would in a water supply system, then a faint picture for a possible concept for a plasma source comes to light. For the water supply system, the source may be a lake far distant in the mountains. For the plasma supply system, the source may simply be the vast expanse of space that, as it is defined by the American theoretical physicist David Bohm, is not really empty space at all. He introduced the concept, the implicate order and explicate order, which appears to be exotic theory, but according to evidence may be most fundamental to everything. David Bohm stated that space is not empty. It is full, a plenum as opposed to a vacuum. It is the ground for the existence of everything, including ourselves. The universe is not separate from the cosmic sea of energy. End of quote. The explicate is then merely a specific expression of enfolded implications that leave on the surface but ripples of countless waves of energy that, coming together, take on a specific form. Since each wave carries an amount of energy, it has been theorized that a cubic inch of space may contain more energy than is founded in all the galaxies in the universe. That this concept may not be far off the mark is evident in the speed limit of light as it propagates through space. The speed of sound in the air is limited by the fluid dynamics of the air. The speed of light may be similarly determined by a type of fluid dynamics that governs the vast background in what is deemed empty space through which light propagates. In the sea of latent energy that is cosmic space, the ripples that form explicitly on the surface may form the quarks that in turn form the electrons and protons that make up the plasma in the universe. It is interesting to note that quarks cannot be divided. An attempt to break them apart yields not two halves, but two whole quarks. As exotic as this may sound, the originator of the implicate order and explicate order, David Bohm, who lived between 1917 and 1992, may have solved the puzzle for us, and also solved the puzzle of the origin of plasma. David Bohm is considered to be one of the most significant theoretical physicists of the 20th century, whom Einstein had referred to as his successor. Exotic as the theory may seem, we have some amazing physical evidence for it, which is expressed in the way our climate on Earth has been modulated in long cycles over the last 500 million years. We see two long climate cycles expressed here that are overlaid over each other. We see a 150 million years cycle and a 31 million years cycle expressed. These are huge cycles with enormous effects. Note where on the gigantic scale the freeze-up of Antarctica is located, and where the current state of the world is located. That puts us at the lowest and coldest point in 440 million years. These very long cycles can be seen as evidence that the plasma that powers our sun may have its origin primarily in intergalactic space. Researchers at the Los Alamos National Laboratory have come to the recognition that vast plasma streams extend through all cosmic space, combining all galaxies with networks of plasma streams. The plasma streams that have galaxies at their node point, with plasma being electric in nature, are inherently subject to the electric resonance principles. For the Milky Way galaxy, which appears to be located at one of the node points between large galaxies, the resonance characteristics in the plasma streams would become expressed in our galaxy as very long plasma density cycles, with the lengths of the cycles corresponding to the lengths of the plasma streams. This means for us that the closest galaxy to the Milky Way, named the Andromeda Galaxy, which lays 2.5 million light-years distant, appears to correspond to the 31 million year resonance cycle that we find modulated in the Milky Way and the climate cycles on Earth. The other connecting stream from the Milky Way would be correspondingly longer. It would likely lead to the gigantic M83 galaxy that lays 15.2 million light-years distant, and cause the 150 million year cycle. The resonance waves in both of these long-distance plasma streams coming together in the Milky Way would give us the 31 and 150 million years plasma density cycles respectively, that become overlaid and expressed as climate cycles on Earth. The resulting evidence in historic climate cycles seems to tell us that the plasma source for our Sun, and for every sun in our galaxy, is located far distant in intergalactic space, which the sync effect of our Sun, together with every star in our galaxy, draws from, which thereby keeps the entire plasma flow landscape in motion. However, the flow through the faucet depends on the pressure at the source. This means that the fusion sink process depends for its functioning on the supply line density, which is the plasma density in the galaxy. Right now, the galactic plasma density is at a low point. The 31 and 150 million years plasma density cycles are both at or near their lowest point. This combined low has brought us to the density zone where ice ages erupt, according to the dynamics of the local resonance cycles that are specific for our solar system. Here too, we see several cycles overlapping near their low point, with the result that our Sun will likely go inactive for the lack of plasma density. When the sink effect draws more than the supply line holds, the process becomes interrupted till the supply stream recovers. Here, the big ice ages unfold with an inactive Sun, except for short periods until the supply density becomes re-established. We are in this zone. Since the need for the sink feature is not readily apparent, allow me to illustrate it by comparing the plasma flow system with a water supply system. Water supply systems typically have a faucet installed. When one opens the faucet, water flows. When this happens, the water in the system flows across the entire length of the supply line, all the way to the source that may be a lake high in the mountains. In such a system, the open faucet becomes a type of sink that enables the water to flow to where it is needed. With the faucet open, water flows throughout the entire length of the pipeline system. When the faucet is closed, nothing flows anywhere. Now let's look at an extreme example. In the process of creating the uranium atom, 238 protons were fused together to form the central nucleus for it. Before the protons were fused, they were a part of the plasma landscape and were repelling each other. After the atom is formed, the 238 protons suddenly are no longer a part of the electric landscape, where they would add to the plasma pressure. The forming of the atom left behind a vacuum, as it were, in the plasma landscape. Of course, the vacuum is quickly filled with inflowing plasma. In this manner, a significant rate of flow is created in the movement of plasma. The flow becomes reflected throughout the entire system of plasma streams, reaching far back into interstellar space. Interstellar plasma streams are set in motion by this consuming plasma fusion process that becomes a dynamic sink. The plasma sink is needed. Without a sink, no flow happens. Now, when plasma flows in interstellar space, the magnetic fields produced by the electric flow draws the plasma streams closer together by what is called the Lorentz force. Of course, when the plasma streams are drawn together, the electromagnetic pinching of them into an ever smaller cross-section increases the plasma density. The increased plasma density, in turn, increases the magnetic fields, which in turn pinches the current ever tighter. This self-feeding process forms the geometry of a bowl-type structure at the point of the highest plasma density. The magnetic fields become intensely tangled up at a point of high concentration, whereby the bowl-shaped end opens up and enables concentrated plasma to escape. The node points would logically occur near a plasma sink, which motivates the plasma flow in the first place. Let's assume that the plasma sink is our Sun, as the center of the system. In this case, the bowl-shaped magnetic fields would be focused onto our Sun. Normally, interstellar plasma streams are not visible, because the plasma particles are too small to be visible. But in a few extremely high-powered examples, such as in the Red Square Nebula, some parts of the bowl-shaped geometry do become visible in the areas of the highest plasma concentration and atomic concentration, where the dance of the electrons in plasma interacts with the synthesized atoms. Contrary to general perception, nebulas are not the remains of exploded stars, but are high-powered electromagnetic structures. In the case of the Red Square Nebula, a number of unique features of the high-powered electromagnetic bowl-type structure become visible. The plasma researcher David Lapointe has extensively explored the nature of the magnetic fields of bowl-shaped magnetic structures, which he has termed the primer fields. He identified 3 unique magnetic features. He has identified what he calls a confinement dome, a flip ring, and a choke ring. The flip ring is a magnetic ring that flips the incoming plasma stream upwards under the confinement dome, where plasma becomes intensely concentrated. The concentrated plasma becomes then focused downward by the choke ring that focuses the concentrated plasma onto a sun that acts as a sink for the plasma flow. All 3 features are visible in the Red Square Nebula. The features that we see in the Red Square Nebula correspond with what David LaPointe has been able to replicate in the laboratory. The features also match in principle the resulting plasma shapes observed in high-energy plasma flow experiments conducted at the Los Alamos National Laboratory by Antonin Parat, Director of Experiments. In electrodynamic systems, the flow of electricity is critical. It is exclusively the flow of electricity that creates magnetic fields. No other cause for magnetic effects exist. By the resulting magnetic fields, the electric plasma streams become aligned. They become pinched together and become increasingly concentrated by the magnetic fields in such a manner that a high-density plasma sphere forms around a zinc object, like our Sun is. By this process, the plasma surrounding our Sun becomes so dense that electric fusion reactions can and do occur at the Sun's surface in intensely concentrated plasma, magnetically confined by the primal fields. This is precisely what causes our Sun to become a sink for interstellar plasma, which it must be in order to motivate the flow of plasma into it. For a closer look, we need to look at the Sun's surface. When the Sun is observed with an optical telescope, the Sun is seen as a vast sea of granule cells, which sometimes break down, leaving sunspots in the wake. Since the Sun is powered on its surface by electric plasma interaction, the granules are themselves cells of primal fields in operation on a relatively small scale. The cells are typically 1,000 kilometers across. This means that the surface of the Sun is a vast sea of cellular primal field structures, all operating side by side, with each having its own flip ring and confinement dome. And here again, the inflowing plasma that is at this stage highly concentrated around the Sun becomes even more extremely concentrated under each cell's confinement dome. In this case, the plasma becomes so immensely concentrated and accelerated under the confinement dome that nuclear fusion occurs. As I said before, the resulting nuclear fusion process causes the Sun to act as a plasma sink. Without the fusion process on the surface of the Sun, which synthesizes all natural atoms, the Sun could not be powered with external energy. The reactions simply would not occur. Nothing would flow. However, when atoms are formed, the previously electrically active plasma particles suddenly become so tightly packed and perfectly balanced that they become electrically neutral. As a consequence, they cease to exist in the electric landscape. By being no longer tied to anything, the synthesized atoms flow away with the solar wind. By this process of electric atomic synthesis, a powerful zinc effect is created in which, in addition, all the natural elements that exist, that the planets are made of, were and are created by the process. Instead of the pp chain of fusion that is theorized for the internally heated Sun, which ends at the helium-4 stage, No such limit is inherent in the plasma-powered surface fusion process. The synthesis extends far beyond the helium fusion stage there. The evidence that a wide range of surface fusion is happening is found in the remarkably close agreement of the measured element ratios on the surface of the Sun, shown in black, with the known cosmic abundance ratio for the same elements in the solar system, shown in white. The heavier elements, past the helium stage, should therefore not be present in the atmosphere of the Sun at all, if the Sun was powered by internal nuclear fusion. None should be there. Still, they have all been measured there. Their presence, that shouldn't be, invalidates the internal fusion theory still further. The presence of heavy elements in the solar atmosphere proves the electric surface fusion concept, which alone enables atomic synthesis to be possible on the Sun, in a process in which atoms are fused directly from plasma. This includes all the known natural elements in the periodic table. If all of these heavy elements were synthesized in the core of the Sun, these elements would have accumulated there and would have become the core, a very heavy core, which the Sun does not have and cannot have. This type of paradox, however, is not found on the external fusion platform. That strong fusion synthesis is happening on the surface of the Sun is visibly evident on Earth. It is evident by the existence of noctilucent clouds high in the stratosphere. We see rivers of water vapor present there, frozen into ice crystals that were evidently not lifted up from the surface 80 kilometers high into the stratosphere, but came instead directly from the Sun, carried by the solar winds. Cold fusion drives the universe. Electric fusion on the surface of the Sun is cold fusion. It is enabled by magnetic plasma compression and is maintained by the sink effect of the fusion itself. The heating of the photosphere is a subsequent phenomenon. It is a comparatively minuscule phenomenon at 5,505 degrees Celsius. All the nuclear fusion experiments on Earth are based on the illusion that the fusion process inside the Sun, which the experiments aim to replicate, require those 15 million degrees that are theorized to exist in the Sun for the internal heating that is deemed to so violently agitate the atoms that they become forced to fuse. For this reason, all fusion experiments on Earth are hot fusion experiments, even though hot fusion doesn't actually happen on the Sun and likely nowhere in the universe either. Cold nuclear fusion is the fusion that has created all the elements that the planets are made of. The atoms in the universe are not the result of the mythical primordial Big Bang, but are the product of cold-powered electric fusion that is motivated exclusively by the electric force and is maintained by the fusion process itself, as it creates an electric sink where plasma electricity is being bottled up and neutralized into packages of electrically neutral atoms. It is not unreasonable, therefore, to assume that all the atomic elements in the solar system that the planets are made of, which together make up 14/100% of the visible mass of the solar system, were synthesized on the surface of the Sun in a nuclear fusion process that creates atomic structures. The remaining 99.86% of the mass of the solar system is plasma, located in the Sun. This ratio does not even include the mass of the plasma in the primal fields and in the solar winds, and so on. The extremely high plasma-to-mass ratio tells us that atomic elements are extremely rare in the universe, even though they are the heart of the world in which we live. Every element in our world was synthesized on the Sun over time. Most of the synthesis occurred during the epoch in which the Sun itself was forged in the high-density plasma landscape near the center of the galaxy. This means that the synthesizing system that produces the vast abundance of different atomic elements that make up our world must necessarily be enormously efficient. The great efficiency is rooted in the dynamics of electrically motivated cold fusion that creates its own sink. The cold fusion process in the Sun is simple. All protons repel each other strongly by the electric force that is one of the basic forces of the universe. Each proton also packs a substantial mass that is roughly 2,000 times greater than the mass of an electron. When energy is invested into putting the mass of a proton into motion, and this kinetic energy becomes great enough to overcome the electric repulsion, then two protons will snap together. They will fuse. As the protons fuse, some of the kinetic energy becomes loaded into one of the fusing protons. The proton becomes transformed thereby. It becomes transformed by the process into a neutron. The resulting neutron carries no electric charge. As the result of this fusion process, the electric field of one of the joining protons simply ceases to exist. The resulting field reduction has an immensely dramatic effect on the plasma stream, where the protons repel one another, as in the case shown here. In this manner, the overall repelling effect that affects the plasma density is much more dramatically reduced. The dynamics create an imploding effect. The resulting shock of the vanishing electric fields and the thereby lost repulsion effect creates a partial void in the plasma pressure, which the adjoining protons are propelled to fill. Thus, the fusion effect creates, by the electric force, some highly energized movement in the plasma stream towards the Sun. The plasma movement, of course, further aids the plasma compression and thereby aids the fusion process. The resulting void accelerates the remaining plasma, just as if one had opened a water faucet more fully. This process is self-escalating. The more protons are joined, the more neutrons are created, and the greater the void in the repelling electric field becomes, which in turn accelerates the process in leaps and bounds. This means that the faucet is effectively opened ever more, the stronger the process flows. Nor does it end here. As more protons are being used up by becoming neutrons that have no electric effect, the ratio between the remaining electrons and protons in the plasma stream suddenly doubles, and in some cases triples. As the fused proton and neutron clusters are joined to one another themselves, forming ever larger clusters, the overall electron density surrounding the larger clusters is thereby increased ever more, to the point that the electrons too become highly energetic and become bound up by the now increasing electric energy strengths of the accumulating nuclei. When this happens, the result is even more dramatic. When the electric charge of the electrons balance the charge of the remaining protons, the entire electric scene becomes a great void. All protons and electrons in the entire atomic construction lose their overall electric field potential, as if they had vanished from the universe. The void is so great that substantial plasma streams are drawn into it, like into a bottomless pit. In this manner, the electric nuclear fusion synthesis creates, in effect, a huge bottomless pit that eats up electric fields in plasma. This bottomless pit sucks up plasma, by which atomic elements emerge. In comparison, the waterline carries the plasma streams. The faucet is the fusion process that the plasma flows into. Out of the faucet comes a stream of assembled atoms that are electrically neutral and dissipate into the landscape. In the process, the faucet gets exceedingly hot. The energy that drives the system comes from the active fusion process, enabled by the plasma sink principle. The same principle applies here that we utilize on Earth to drive hydroelectric generating plants, powered by the pressure differential between the reservoir level and the discharge level. From hydroelectric plants, the generated energy is carried away by electric transmission lines. From the sun, the process heat is radiated as a light and heat energy, enabling life to be. Solar fusion is cold fusion. We should replicate it. Cold fusion, as we see the principle applied on the sun, is the most efficient energy producer in the universe. It is anti-entropic in nature, with a resource that is self-renewing. Cold fusion is efficient as a solar process because its active component is self-accelerating. Thereby, large amounts of energy and atomic elements are generated with relative ease on the solar surface. Nothing is forced there. Everything happens naturally. The sink effect is so efficient in accelerating plasma that the millions of degrees in thermal energy that the fusion experiments on Earth require to force atoms to fuse are not required on the Sun. The Sun operates with a cold fusion process, in which thermal and light energy is produced as a secondary effect by the mechanics of the process. All of the current artificial nuclear fusion power processes fail because they fail to utilize the critical sink principle that motivates cold fusion. They employ enormously large external forces in an effort to break the electric repulsion barrier that develops between approaching atomic nuclei once the electron shells are penetrated. The kind of agitation of atoms that breaks this barrier requires enormous energies as input to make the thing possible. And even with all that, efficient fusion has not yet been achieved, not even with such gigantic efforts as are made at the National Ignition Facility, which aims for inertial fusion by means of light energy compression. The effort has failed so far. It has failed in spite of the most ideal fusion fuel being used for the experiment. The easiest to fuse fusion fuel is made up of two types of overbuilt atomic isotopes, deuterium and tritium, that are violently forced to connect with each other. When they do connect and fuse, one of the overbuilt isotopes releases a redundant neutron that is not required for the end product. When this happens, its previously invested binding energy becomes liberated. This liberated energy is intended to be used to power electricity generating systems. This, in short, is the dream scenario. The attempted power production processes all invariably fail, because the intended fusion process does not aim for the natural sink effect, but forces results with the injection of brute agitation, for which enormous energies are expended to generate the agitation. Consequently, it takes radically more energy as input to operate such fusion processes than the results give back. The inherent inefficiency that results from substituting the natural sink principle with brute force renders nuclear fusion power production on Earth a hopeless proposition. This basic failure in principle stands in addition to all the other problems associated with the projects that render the hope for success an empty dream. When it is being said that terrestrial nuclear power projects aim to replicate the process that powers the Sun, a fundamental error is incurred because what is being replicated in experiments does not occur naturally, either on the Sun nor anywhere else as a process. The actual solar processes are infinitely more efficient than what the experiments aim for. The natural solar processes that are in operation on the Earth are not yet fully utilized for power production anywhere on Earth, experimentally or otherwise, for the simple reason that they are deemed not to exist. This does not mean that the real solar energy processes will never be replicated on Earth. Plenty of evidence exists that cosmic electric plasma surrounds the Earth in a pattern that is also visible on the Sun. On Earth, a plasma flow pattern is visible in the ionosphere. The enormous electric potential that is visible there appears to supply the driving energy for a long list of natural processes on Earth. Among the electric systems powered from the ionosphere are hurricanes, lightning, and tornadoes, whenever thermal events create a sufficiently conductive connection to the ionosphere. We can step up to the plate and participate in the utilization of the cosmic power system, and beyond that, by replicating on Earth the cold fusion principle that the Sun has utilized for its billions of years. When we get to this point, nuclear fusion as a synthesizing fusion will power the economies of humanity. Then the old saying will have a new meaning attached, that the sky is not the limit. The limit is in the mind. The Sun is not an energy producer, but is an energy converter. The universe doesn't need to produce energy. It is energy. It employs its energy as a creative force.